Good morning, everyone. It is Sunday, August the 9th, 2020. It is currently 8:08 a.m. Central Time, and I'm here at Victory Baptist Church, located in Ovalo, Texas, for another Sunday of live broadcasting. Now, last Sunday was an absolute and complete disaster. Yesterday was an absolute and complete disaster. So I would be lying to you if I were to tell you that I am optimistic about how today is going to go. I am not even cautiously optimistic. I am pretty much convinced that everything's going to go wrong today. But in spite of that feeling of absolute sense of dread and despair, okay, maybe that's a little hyperbole, or maybe not. Maybe that's a pretty accurate way I'm feeling right now. In spite of all of that, I am here. I'm sitting here in the sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church. I have Bibles. I have notebooks. I have my iPad. I have a Bible dictionary. I've got bottles of water. And I'm going to try to make the most of today. And we're going to do a lot of live broadcasting. I'm going to do live broadcasting from now all the way up till the Sunday school hour at 10 o'clock. Then obviously I'll be live broadcasting for the morning worship service. Then I'll obviously be live broadcasting this evening at 6 p.m. But I'll be back here sometime in the early afternoon hours. I'll go home, eat some lunch, and then come back and then just start live broadcasting again. And we're going to cover lots of topics, lots of controversial issues. I know at least one big controversial one that we'll be talking about, probably some devotional studies. I really don't know where today's live broadcasting is going to take us. We know one place it needs to take us. It needs us to take us back to Genesis chapter 5. Yesterday, I tried to reteach Genesis chapter 5, and here's what happened. Last Sunday, I was obviously teaching from Genesis chapter 5, had reached close to the end of that teaching when the interruption took place. If you didn't hear what happened, I'm not here to talk about it again. Don't ever want to talk about it again. So yesterday, I'm like, you know what? I've got to get myself in the right mindset. I need to turn on the microphone, and I need to teach Genesis 5 again. So I just turned on the microphone, started teaching, opened up my iPad while I was teaching, because I knew how to start it. I knew how to introduce it. While I'm teaching, I open up my iPad, open up my notes in my iPad, and guess what? The notes somehow ended up being deleted. I don't know if in all of the chaos that happened Sunday, I don't know when it happened, but they were gone. So there I am live on the air trying to reteach Genesis chapter 5 from complete memory. And I did an hour of teaching, but by the time I was done, I knew that it was garbage. So I deleted that. So Genesis 5, 2 hours of teaching and absolutely nothing to show from it. Yeah, let's just say that's frustrating. So it's been a crazy it's been a crazy week. That's the only thing I can say. But let's set all of that aside. One of the things that I have been trying to talk about over and over and over and over and over and over, especially during since COVID-19 has begun, and especially trying to emphasize it this summer, is the subject of wisdom. Wisdom, 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 wisdom. And I've tried to get everyone to read the book of Proverbs, ask questions about the book of Proverbs, think about the book of Proverbs, because, man, if you look at the world right now, or a woman, man, a boy, girl, whoever you may be, I think we can all agree that right now we need biblical wisdom more than we have ever needed it. I mean, as Christians right now, we need wisdom. We need to think biblically. We need to have a spiritual wisdom. We don't need a wisdom that is earthly, sensual, and devilish. We need a completely opposite kind of wisdom than the world provides. We need a wisdom that comes from God, a wisdom that comes from the scriptures. So I've really been trying to emphasize that. So I think you can understand that when I saw that the Discover the Word podcast, Discover the Word radio program was going to dedicate 2 weeks to the subject of wisdom, but they were not going to take it from the book of Proverbs. They were going to take it from the book of James. Obviously, that got my attention. And so, since I was going to listen to it, you know what that means. You're going to listen to it, because I'm going to take what they're saying, play it, and then we're going to analyze it, and we're going to talk about it. So far, I think one of the episodes have been really, really beneficial, really challenged us in how we looked at part of James chapter 1. The other programs haven't been as beneficial, but we're going to wait and see where we're going. Today's, what we're going to listen to is it was not this Friday, but last Friday's episode called The Wisdom of Joy. The Wisdom of Joy. Now, I don't know exactly where they're going to go. I would have thought they would, maybe they're going to go back to James chapter 1, count it all joy. I don't really know where they're going to go, but we're going to see. Remember what I do. I don't listen to these in advance. I'm going to listen to it in real time, and then I analyze it, and then we are going to take what they're saying, try to put it into the broader context of what we've been saying about biblical wisdom, and see if we benefit from it, learn from it. I always think that these are beneficial. I put it this way, even if no one likes them, I like to do this because it really puts me on my toes because I've got to react in real time. I don't have time to rehearse. There's no rehearsal done. There's no notes. So I'm kind of flying without a net, and that can kind of get me back in the right mindset and the right way of thinking for the rest of today. So are you ready? Here we go. We're going to go to the Discover the Word program. Again, I have a kind of a love-hate with this. I love the fact that they usually will give me something that forces me to get into the scriptures and start thinking and studying. Sometimes, though, I get frustrated with how they handle the scriptures, and of course, some of their kind of theological leanings I sometimes have issues with. But the lesson here is even when we disagree with something, we can still benefit from it spiritually if we will take it, use it, and then jump in ourselves. So that's what we're going to do. Here we go. Discover the Word program, their episode, The Wisdom of Joy, from their 2-week series on the wisdom from James, or the wisdom of James. And we're going to see what we can learn. So let's get ready. Let's jump in, and let's try to let this be the beginning of hopefully what will be a very, very good Sunday for all of us. Here we go.
Got a question for you to begin today's conversation on Discover the Word. In your experience, have selfish motives ever made one of your relationships better? Well, that's pretty easy, isn't it? Because I think we all know that selfishness hurts relationships, and others-centeredness enhances them. But wow, do we still struggle with this, don't we? Well, I hope you'll take your spot in your chair at the table with Mart DeHaan and Elisa Morgan and Bill Crowder for a discussion about motives, because the struggle with motives sounds a lot like something that James writes about in his New Testament letter. The wisdom of James, the wisdom of joy. That series continues next on Discover the Word.
Now, you talk about a relevant topic, selfish motives, selfishness, motives. When we talk about a lot of the things churches are doing right now, especially in response to COVID-19, I hate that I have to keep referencing certain things back to that, but that's the dominant thing happening in our culture right now. So as we're trying to navigate the world of COVID-19, navigating all of the divisions and fighting and arguing happening within Christianity, one of the things we have to ask ourselves, whatever we're doing, no matter what it is, are we being motivated by selfishness? Are we being motivated by the focus on self? Are we making an issue about us, or are we focused on other people? If our decisions that we're making is motivated by selfishness and only our own self-interest and a focus on self, and that we're trying to make a point because we're trying to make that point, so really it's about us, it's not even really about the point we're making, then that's a problem. And I think that checking our motives and being honest with our motives, it's hard to do because our heart is so deceitful. I think that we can convince ourselves that we're doing something for the right reason, we're doing it the right way, and that our motives are so pure, but in reality, our motives are not. So this is a very timely topic, motives, selfish motives. Something to really think about. When you consider what you're doing, do you ever stop to consider what is your motivation behind it? Now, you may justify the action, but what is the motivation that's leading to the action? that's when you have to really go deeper and really analyze yourself. All right, let's see what they have to say about motives, selfishness, and see what we can learn from it.
And welcome to Discover the Word on this Friday as we wrap up week 1 of our 2-week study based in the New Testament book of James called The Wisdom of James, the Wisdom of Joy. This is a series we pulled out of our archives from several years ago before group member Daniel Ryan Day became part of the team. And so it's just Mart and Elisa and Bill in these conversations. Now, Mart is leading the group in this series, and today he's going to make an important connection between the wisdom that we discovered in chapter 1 that we ask for and the way James describes what that wisdom looks like later in the letter in chapter 3. And as we'll see, motives are going to be at the center of this discussion. In fact, Mart wants to begin today's conversation with a quote that he found from Mahatma Gandhi. He wants Elisa and Bill to reflect on it for just a moment with him, and so here is Mart with that quote from Gandhi.
The moment there is suspicion about a person's motives, everything that person does becomes tainted.
Wow.
Boy, no kidding.
That's really true.
How do you read that?
We have things like that every day. We have to figure out, what am I going to believe what I hear in the news? How do I know? But the suggestion is enough for me to wonder from then on.
Yeah, when you think about motives, it becomes such a difficult subject because we're so messy on the insides. And sometimes we don't even know our own motives about things. We might want to be presenting a positive motive, but inside we know there's this little thing of, yeah, but if it works, this is really good for me. The whole issue of motives, I think, is one of the most undervalued issues in the Christian life.
Oh, and it can be consuming when we get to the place where we can't trust one another. I've often thought, when a person plays the trust card, if I were to say to Elisa, you know what, I just don't trust you.
Oh, it's death. It's death on the relationship.
It's
and
death.
Death
It
on the
is.
fruit that could come from the relationship.
Yeah.
And there's another sense in which if a person who perhaps you don't have the best track record with comes to you and says, just trust me.
Right.
Yeah.
It does the other thing.
It does the opposite.
It pushes it the other direction.
Exactly. Even the suggestion. Isn't this what Gandhi is suggesting? The moment there is suspicion about a person's motives, everything he does becomes tainted.
That's a powerful quote. The moment someone begins to suspect, the moment there's suspicion about someone's motives, everything they do becomes corrupted. Because once you begin to question someone's motives, then everything they do, you're going to see it in light of your questioning and your suspicion. And I think this is a very important thing. We talk in the Bible about the fact that the Bible says, judge not lest ye be judged. And we know that doesn't mean you can't judge anything, because in the text itself, in fact, we'll go there. Let's just jump over there. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, judge not that ye be not judged. Judge not that ye be not judged. But then down in verse 15, beware of false prophets. So clearly, if you're going to beware of false prophets, you're making a judgment. And to say, judge not lest ye be judged, if you say that to someone else, judge not lest ye be judged, you've obviously made a judgment that they're judging. So there is a place where we make a judgment, but I think this is one place that we can be very honest with. When we start trying to judge people's motives, we start trying to judge people's hearts, we start trying to judge what people are thinking, that's when I think we're going beyond what the Bible, we're judging something we have no understanding of. I can't judge someone's motives. I have no idea. I can't judge what someone is thinking. Once we begin to engage in that way of thinking, well, first, the relationship is going to be destroyed, because the minute you start being suspicious of their motives, everything they do is going to be viewed as being corrupted. Everything they're going to do is going to be called into question, so you're not going to be able to trust anything they say and anything they do. We've got to be very careful as Christians. There are certain things we can judge. We can judge in action because we can see it. We know exactly what was done. We can't start judging. The motive thing becomes very difficult. Now, we can't judge it in others, but I think what they're getting ready to get into is that as Christians, we've got to be judging our own motives. We've got to question what our motives are, because the only one who really knows what your motivation is you. And the only one who really knows what my motivation is me. That's it. because that motivation is something that arises internally. There is a limit to what we can judge. There is a limit. Sometimes Christians feel like that they can judge everything that everyone does. Somehow they feel like that they have some, they have some knowledge that other people don't possess, that they're somehow omniscient and they can question and judge everything. Judge not lest ye be judged. There is and in fact, look, if you look at that, the way that scripture is written, judge not that ye be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged, and with what measure you mete, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Sometimes we become so preoccupied with everyone else's motives, everyone else's thoughts, but we ignore ourselves. Look, there's some things we can't judge. I can't read a person's heart. I can't read a person's mind. I can't get inside a person. I can look at the external act, look at the scriptures and go, that external act is condemned, but I have no idea what motivated you. I have no idea what was going on inside of you. I cannot say that. Again, we can go to the Old Testament. Here's David, who his external acts were horrible and can be condemned, but yet the Bible, God refers to David as a man after God's own heart. How is that possible? The outer actions did not match what supposedly was an inner reality, because that's sometimes our outer actions don't always reflect everything going on inside. We're limited in what we can judge. So motives, let's make it very clear. Motives are something you have to look at to judge yourself. Don't start looking at other people's motives and judging them. The minute you become suspicious of their motives, everything they do becomes corrupted. They can never do anything right, because everything they do, you're going to be like, that reflects that motive I think they have. Yeah, the motive you think they have. That's your presupposition, and now it becomes your hermeneutic and how you interpret every action everything they do. And that at that point, everything falls apart. Everything begins to fall apart. So this is a very powerful quote from Gandhi. Once we become suspicious of motives, everything a person does becomes corrupted. Very powerful. But again, this brings up the whole. This just brings up this whole subject of judgment, motives, and I want to make it clear: I can't judge your motives. You can't judge my motives, but you can judge your motives. And I can judge my motives. The problem with us judging our own motives is we've got to be very honest with ourselves, and sometimes we're not, right? So there's a very important subject. I'm just curious to see what they do with it.
Wasn't it Larry Crabb in his book Inside Out where he said, even in our best moments, we don't have pure motives?
Right.
That there's some shred of self behind everything, no matter how hard we wish it weren't that way.
Right.
And I think that in reality, in healthy relationship, we're not without poor motives at times. We're not perfect, but we're honest, we're vulnerable, we hold each other accountable, we're truth-telling to the best of our ability. And so therefore, even though trust may be challenged in some moments, it's also built in other moments.
Right.
And we develop this web that we begin to understand each other with.
Exactly. And so I think the challenge then is, how do we bring the best out of one another? And how do we put the best face on things realistically and lovingly so that we can operate together? But it seems like that in the process of doing that, something deep has to happen in our soul and our heart. My confidence has to be in somebody else, somebody other than my fellow human, right?
Yeah, because if our motives have some mixture of self and other, we need to know that there's a place we can go where the motives are going to be pure, where the motives are going to be right.
And we all have to be able to find our security in someone other than ourselves.
That's right.
And someone
other than each other.
So that we can be good for one another. So that we don't get obsessed with this idea of questioning one another's motives and therefore, in the process, tainting everything that the other person does.
Right.
And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I think James, writing in the New Testament, his letter, really addresses these issues of the heart. He offers us a source for wisdom, a wisdom of joy, we've been saying. in the process of relating to one another as imperfect people, two imperfect people, but who have the opportunity of sharing together a joy that accompanies love and cooperative relationships rather than competitive relationships.
From a perfect source.
From a perfect source. Let's go ahead. We know that in chapter 1 of this New Testament letter, James says that when all kinds, and this is a paraphrase, when all kinds of trouble come into your lives, brothers and sisters, don't just resent them, but consider them an opportunity. And he talks in terms of a joy, considering it an opportunity for something good to happen. And he says, if you don't know how to do that, if you don't know how to find that positive perspective, ask God for wisdom, and he'll give it to you. He's generous. He wants to help you in that. And then over in chapter 3, just to show us that James has not forgotten about wisdom, he describes, I think, the kinds of motives we're talking about, and he places them within two different kinds of wisdom. We've already been talking about this. Let's just read it again. Elisa, would you begin reading in chapter 3, verse 13, read through verse 16, and then Bill, if you'd read 17 and 18, all right?
Okay, so the first kind of wisdom is wisdom that comes from ourselves. It comes from earth sources,
right.
Okay?
And the motives of this one will follow a certain pattern.
They're going to be suspect, yeah.
Yeah, let's look at the motives in this text.
Yeah, listen for those. Who is wise and understanding among you? Well, let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth.
Any motives there?
Yeah, a little bit. And he goes on, such wisdom doesn't come from heaven, but it's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice.
Okay.
And then it picks up in verse 17, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness.
Okay, any motives there?
Yeah, the motive of being peace-loving means that you're not going to drive for what you want at all costs. Considerate means you're going to be looking out for the other person's heart and feelings and life. So in each one of these, there's a component of otherness.
Submissive. That's really yielding to another's desire. Full of mercy.
Yeah.
And mercy is amazing, whether it's justice and judgment or whether it's the more compassionate kind of mercy. And then good fruit, which is what you're going to be left with. And then it's impartial and sincere.
So let's focus in on that peaceable characteristic.
Okay.
The wisdom that comes from above is peaceable. It's peace-loving, as you've indicated.
Now, this is an interesting kind of concept. There are two kinds of wisdom. There's a wisdom that descends from above, that comes from above, and there's a wisdom that doesn't come from above. There's a wisdom that is from God, and there is a wisdom that is earthly, sensual, and devilish. And that's found in James 3:15. So there are two kinds of wisdom, but with what's connected with these two kinds of wisdom are two very different kinds of motivations and motives. One is very selfish, self-focused, motivated by self-interest, and the other one has a different kind of motive attached to it. The other one is pure, it's peaceable, it's gentle, it's easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. It seems to be focused on other people and what would be better for other people and better for the situation. So two kinds of wisdom produces two kinds of motivations, which then ultimately leads to two different kinds of fruit or two different kinds of actions. So it's very interesting. Two different kinds of wisdom produce two different kinds of motivations, which lead to two different kinds of fruit. Very interesting. Sometimes we just see wisdom, but then wisdom produces a motivation, and a motivation produces an action. So it starts with the wrong wisdom, you get the wrong motivation, you get the wrong action. The right kind of wisdom should produce the right motivation with the right kind of action. So your motivation really is determined by the wisdom that you are utilizing and that's dominating your thinking and your life. You get the wisdom wrong, you get the motivation wrong, and obviously you're going to get the wrong kind of action. Very interesting kind of formula being established here.
It seeks right relationships.
Okay, now is that a kind of okay, let's just keep everything peaceful. Okay, let's just not make
peace at
anybody
any
uncomfortable. Is that what this kind of peaceable is?
What do you think?
Probably not.
If it was, what would the motive of that be?
Yeah, that would be the wrong motive, because
Yeah.
that'd be peace in order for me to have calm in my life, as opposed to peace because that's what's best for the situation.
That's right. I remember, at least in one of our recent conversations, as we were looking at these characteristics of the wisdom that comes from above, you remember you asked the question, is there any order?
I did.
Is
I
there
know.
any
I
order
wondered
to
if we
these?
were
Yeah.
building on things here.
I think that was a really important question, because in our last conversation, we talked about the wisdom that comes from above is first of all pure. Remember what our conclusions were as to the meaning, the content, the heart of that purity?
It was seeking the best of others, the welfare of others. It was seeking others instead of self.
Yeah. And how did we come to that?
We knew it came from above. We knew it came from heaven. And we really didn't think, Bill, you brought up that the 1 Corinthians 13 version of the most excellent way is that it's love.
Right.
And so this kind of purity is really a purity only God can provide
Right.
through Jesus.
And we also related it to the word but in this text, which shows there's a contrast between the wisdom from below and the wisdom from above. And when it comes to the characteristic of a wisdom that's peaceable, how does that contrast with what we've just seen described in the wisdom from below?
Or the wisdom from below, you talk about bitter envy, selfish ambition, boasting. Those are things that do not build peace.
No.
Those are things that are very combative kind of characteristics. So peaceful or peacemaking or peace-loving is really the opposite of bitter envy, selfish ambition, which instead of peace at any cost, is my way at any cost.
Right. And the result, again, of those kinds of motives, how does James describe? The net effect, the net result of those kinds of motives is what?
Disorder and evil practices, crazy stuff.
Right.
A really miserable life.
Right.
Miserable.
So there's a certain kind of harvest there, isn't there? I mean, that's what you harvest. Read again, Bill, verses 17 and 18.
But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness.
Okay, so a person says, okay, I get it. All I have to do now is I got to be pure, I got to be peaceable, considerate, and I've got to be full of mercy and good fruit. What's wrong with that kind of thinking?
At no point does James says that that's what we have to be and do.
What does he say?
He says that's the characteristics of the wisdom we need, the wisdom that comes from above.
And when we ask in James 1, if we don't have it already and we ask God for it, He will give it to us generously. I'm thinking our job here in getting this whole list of stuff that's real wisdom in our lives is to receive it.
To receive it, exactly. To seek the Christ who personifies it, and to ask Him to do in us really what we can't begin to do for ourselves.
All right, this is an interesting concept that these characteristics flow from the right kind of wisdom. You get the right kind of wisdom, you get the right kind of you get the right motives, and you get the right motives, then you get the right actions. Now, the only thing I'm a little suspect of, and I know it's common Christian language, and I know whenever I deal against the Christian majority, but that's okay. I don't think it works in the way that they just described. Hey, you lack wisdom, you simply ask, and God just gives it. I don't think it's like, hey, I need the wisdom, and then boom, it just gets dropped. It gets downloaded into me. I think I ask God for wisdom, but I have a responsibility to pursue that kind of wisdom because God's wisdom is contained in His Word. It's going to require me studying it, reading it, pursuing it, memorizing it, struggling with it, thinking that God will also produce wisdom maybe by the trials and difficulties He brings into our life and working through those. I don't think it's a magic download. Hey, Lord, I need wisdom. Boom, boom. I mean, you can take two individuals. One asks God for wisdom and doesn't do anything else. The other one asks God for wisdom, but he studies, he thinks, he's working, he's struggling, or she, it doesn't matter. You're going to see a difference in the one versus the other. And so I know Christianity always handles it. Just ask and you'll get it. It doesn't work that way. But this is an interesting concept. Two kinds of wisdom produces two kinds of wisdom, two kinds of motivations, two kinds of fruits or actions. it all starts with the wisdom. You get the wisdom wrong, your motives are going to be wrong. The motives are going to be wrong, your actions are going to be wrong. Very, very important stuff right here that we could do a lot of thinking about. Let's see what else they have to say here as they wrap this up.
Yeah, the wisdom of joy that James is talking about is a peace-loving attitude from Christ, that although it may result in occasionally some temporary conflict, it will have an eventual harvest of peace and renewed relationships. You're listening to Discover the Word with Mart DeHaan, Elisa Morgan, and Bill Crowder. This is a series that we're revisiting from several years ago, and so that's why Daniel Ryan Day is not at the table for this study, but he will be back once we finish going through these discussions on the wisdom of James, the wisdom of joy, next week. Well, this week may be over, but there's even more content for you to enjoy from your Discover the Word team. You can find years and years of past series online at discovertheword.org. Or you can also binge listen to the latest studies with the help of your favorite podcasting app. Just search for Discover the Word in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Google Play, or SoundCloud, and then be sure to subscribe or follow. You can listen that way. That website or the podcasting option really are certainly something to take note of, because some things may be changing for some of you next week. So please keep those alternatives in mind so that you can continue to be at the table with us. Now, at Discover the Word and Our Daily Bread Ministries, it's our mission to make the life-changing wisdom of the Bible.
All right, we'll stop right there. I wanted you to at least hear their advertisement for their podcast. I think the thing that's changing is I think Discover the Word is going to be leaving a lot of radio stations. I think they're moving towards podcasting and getting away from radio, which is an interesting development that we may be seeing more and more of as we move forward. A lot. Probably in many cases, maybe it's more profitable. Maybe it's a lot easier to do just a podcast than trying to work with radio. And how many people are you reaching via radio in 2020? So the ever-changing culture in which we live, and the church needs to always be moving forward and thinking, forward about how we can get our message out there. They mentioned Spotify. Now, we're in the middle of a Spotify challenge, trying to get you to subscribe, download, and stream our podcast via Spotify, because we're trying to get ourselves on the religion chart. Right now, if you look at the religion chart on Spotify, this keeps track of all the top podcasts in the religion category. You get things from Harry Potter and the Sacred Text to astrology to ghost stories to Joel Osteen to Joyce Meyer. You have very little good theology on the religion charts for Spotify podcasts. So please download Spotify, subscribe to the Theology Central, VBC Bible Institute, subscribe to all of our podcasts on Spotify, listen to them like crazy, and we'll see if we can get on the chart. So far, my challenge hasn't been very successful. Now, my secular podcast currently on, we're doing great. We are moving up in the top podcasts of all categories on Spotify. We are now moving up that chart, the top podcast chart, not a specific type of all the podcasts. We are actually moving up that chart, and we're moving up the news chart with my secular podcast. So I'm very successful in the secular world. I'm not very successful in the theology world. I guess I'm successful to some level, but not Spotify charting successful. So if you would like to help with the Spotify challenge, download Spotify. Subscribe to the Discover the Word podcast on Spotify. I mean, I would rather have them in the top 20 than Joyce Meyer, Joel Osteen, Ghost Stories, and Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. I'd rather have, Discover the Word on there. So if you want to participate in that, it's very simple. Download Spotify, look for our podcast, subscribe, and then listen, download, and let's see what can happen. But there you have it. That was an interesting conversation, interesting discussion. And when it comes to motives, I guess I'll summarize it this way. If you become suspicious of other people's motives, everything they're going to do from that point forward is going to be corrupted in your eyes. You cannot judge people's motives. You cannot do that. Biblically, you cannot. There's no way for you, because you can't judge what you don't know, and you don't know someone's motives. And for you to question someone's motives, you're now adding suspicion to them. And based off what? Based off your own perception, based off on what you think, based off what you want. That's not right. That's not biblical. That's not godly. That's fleshly. That's earthly. That's sensual. That's demonic. That's devilish. You cannot do that. What you need to do is focus on your motives. And your motives comes from the wisdom you're utilizing. So if you've got godly wisdom, your motives are going to look like the ones James spoke of. If you have an earthly wisdom, your motives are not going to bring about peace. They're going to be selfish. They're going to cause strife. They're going to cause division. They're going to cause problems because they're motivated from an earthly, fleshly, devilish perspective. Your wisdom determines your motives, and those motives what will flow from those motives are actions. So focus on what you need to do. Focus on which wisdom you're utilizing. Are you sure your wisdom is from God? Are you sure your wisdom is from the Bible, or is your wisdom being determined by something else? Other factors, whether it's politics, whether it's philosophy, it's got to come from God. If you're using biblical wisdom, you'll have biblical motives, which will produce biblical actions. Very simple. The wisdom is the key. The wisdom is the key. All right. So very interesting topic. I hope it sparks lots of conversation, because it really should. This is some really good stuff, and I'm glad we got to listen to it today. All right, you can contact me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. All right, thanks for listening. I'll be back on the air hopefully here shortly, getting ready then for 10 o'clock. We got a lot of things to do today, a lot of live broadcasting. Please participate. Talk to me, email me. What do you want to talk about? What things are you thinking about? Participate. More than happy to try to cover some of the topics you're interested in. All right, I'll stop right there. Everyone have a great day. Remember, just be ready to listen to us to the rest of the day. We'll be live under Theology Central and under VBC. Will probably be the two areas we're live today. Hopefully, we'll go live under the VBC Bible Institute this afternoon and do some Genesis 5 work. We will see. All right, everyone have a great day. God bless.